aren't connected to the grid. That's about 75 million people.
Over several years, it will produce 6,000 megawatts. Ethiopia's current generating capacity is only 4,000 megawatts.
So this dam is also going to generate more power for Ethiopia than it needs, meaning it can export electricity. That's all very good news for Ethiopia. But if you ask Egypt, this dam will be catastrophic. The Nile has been at the center of Egyptian life for millennia. An entire ancient civilization was built around it and relied on the river for transport and irrigation. And that's still the case today. The country relies on the Nile for almost all of its water.
It's a rain-starved, largely desert country. So obviously, any potential interruption to the flow of the Nile is justifiably of huge concern for Egypt.
Egypt controls most of the flow of the River Nile into its country, at least for now.
Egypt's biggest worry is how quickly Ethiopia will fill the reservoir, and our colleagues at Al Jazeera Labs have studied a few scenarios. Say Ethiopia agrees to fill the reservoir over the next 10 years. AJ Labs says that would cut Egypt's water supply by 14% and destroy 18% of its farmland. If Ethiopia fills the dam more quickly, say over 7 years, 1/3 of Egypt's farmland would be lost, and a 5-year window would destroy half of that land. According to their simulations, this is how the Egyptian delta would change over those 10 years. So Ethiopia's best case scenario, filling the dam as soon as possible, is Egypt's worst nightmare. It's no wonder these negotiations have been tough. It was during the Arab Spring in 2011, while Egypt had a revolution on its hands, that Ethiopia started building the dam. Ever since then, Egyptian leaders have tried to stop the project, and military conflict never seemed far.
Last year, Ethiopia accused Egypt of sending rebels to neighboring Eritrea to sabotage the dam, prompting another Nile-sharing country, Sudan, to send its troops to its border.
In 2018, the operating manager of the Ethiopian dam, Semenu Bekele, was found dead.
Bekele's sudden death drew crowds and raised suspicions.
It was reported he'd been shot in broad daylight, which led to protests, but in the end, the authorities said Bekele took his own life. In 2019, Ethiopia's Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed even said no force could stop Ethiopia from building a dam. If there's a need to go to war, we could get millions readied. If some could fire a missile, others could use bombs. This is ultimately an age-old debate about who owns the Nile. In 1929, Egypt signed a treaty with Britain, a colonial power in Africa at the time, that basically guarantees its access to the Nile and gave Egypt a veto over construction projects on the river. But Ethiopia didn't sign that treaty. Then in 1999, all the Nile Basin countries, including Egypt and Ethiopia, signed an agreement on managing water. But that deal was compromised in 2010, when 6 of those countries decided to draw up another treaty. This time, Egypt rejected it because it threatened its historic rights to water.
Egypt's concern that if it moves into a new treaty governing the Nile Basin, then it will be left short of water resources, and also its control over the situation will be massively reduced.
And as far as Sudan goes, it's sort of caught in the middle. Egypt is Sudan's political ally, but the government supports the Renaissance Dam because it'll be a source of affordable energy and it will help regulate flooding. The good news is that Egypt, Ethiopia, and Sudan are in talks with one another. The bad news is that they still haven't answered the tough questions. Questions like, when there's a drought, will Ethiopia consider Egypt's needs? And when is a drought a drought? Those conversations will only get tougher because more dams are being planned, populations are growing, and the climate is changing, all of which will make the Nile and the supply of water increasingly worth fighting over. Hope you're finding Start Here useful. The idea is that we lay out the basics and bring you up to...
Okay, welcome back. Alion and Alassane, as you noticed, it gives us a little bit of the background history on the issue and the conflicts of Nile. And what I wanted to do is I wanted to discuss this matter in 3 segments. first one is the legal issue. Does Egypt have the right to control or deny the use of its own waters of Ethiopia? And the other one would be, what are the projects itself? What does it look like, the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam? And the third part will be, what are the potential conflicts that may be caused by this dispute? So the first one, one of you can try it. The Anglo-Egyptian treaties related, that brought the entire crisis on the surface, is the 1929 treaty between Egypt and United Kingdom, Anglo-Sudanese Treaty of 1959, the often used by the Egyptian experts as a customary use, can't deny legal and historical rights, still connected to colonialism as well. And Egypt claims of the Nile as a life and death situation. The 11 Nile Basin riparian countries, Rwanda, Burundi, DRC, Tanzania, Kenya, Uganda, Ethiopia, Eritrea, South Sudan, and Egypt, those are the ones who has not been benefited from the Nile. Well, they're tributaries, but they were disallowed from building the dam for many years. So the timing to start the dam is when Egypt is having massive appeal. That's what some observers were saying. And what was Morsi's plan to the Nile Gorge? I'm referring to the bombing the dam if they have to. So do you have any comment on this one? Olasan, you want to start?
Oh yeah, basically, bombing the dam is not an appropriate solution to the issue between Ethiopia and Egypt. So I think they can come to the negotiation table. I mean, trying to use there are different the time length like Ethiopia can take to fill up the dam. I think they can use that mechanism to come up with an issue if Egypt won, because Egypt is still clinging to the 1951 treaty that gave Egypt the full right of using the Nile water, and then they don't want any other negotiation or dispute to impact that one. Okay. So that's where the problem lies. Egypt is behaving is being completely selfish when it comes to that. Other than that, if Egypt is flexible, is willing to adopt certain flexibility, I think there is a better solution they can come up with instead of going to war. War is not profitable to any of the countries.
All right. We'll come to the dispute and the conflict later on, but you're saying that there's a better way of solving this crisis than just going into war.
Yep.
All right. Alion, do you have something to say?
Yes, thank you, Petros, and thank you to all the viewers of Tempo Afrique TV. I think some of these treaties are obsolete. If we take in the case of a treaty that was signed in 1929, where Ethiopia was not invited to the table, and we take the impact that is having on populations, that is right now the second largest population in Africa, because Ethiopia is over 110 million people today. And what people forget is the Blue Nile contributes 85% of the water of the Nile. So to say that, yes, you have a population of 100 million people, which is the case of Egypt today, that the rights of the Nile is only, you have the rights on the Nile, and that there is the 11 other countries that are part of the Nile don't have any rights on these waters, is not only condescending, but I think it is inappropriate in the 21st century. Where we have been warned that a lot of the wars today in this century are going to be water wars. And I think we better sit down at the table and discuss these issues as adults that respect each other, that can negotiate as partners. Because Ethiopia cannot do it without Egypt, Egypt cannot do it without Ethiopia. And they have to see this thing as a partnership in dealing with this issue, where they can discuss as respectable partners that how do they manage these waters that it can benefit Egypt, but at the same time that it can benefit Ethiopia. Saying that almost 65% of your population is not connected to the grid, and you want to industrialize, you want to feed these people, is not acceptable in the 21st century. Yes, I can understand that it impacts Egypt, but this is something that people as adults have to sit down and figure out a way of negotiating.
Yeah, well, if we consider Egypt's fear, they said a drought may come if Ethiopia pursues with this project. How realistic is that statement?
To me, I mean, as Alyun said, and even when I first spoke about the issue, is they can come up with a better solution. So it's just that Egypt doesn't want anything or any other treaty or negotiation that's going to impact the 1921 treaty. That's where the problem lies. If Egypt wants to play like a fair game, so he can lose a little bit, and I mean, Ethiopia also can concede a little bit, same as Egypt can concede a little bit, and they can come up with a middle solution where there is a win-win situation. So I think where Ethiopia or Egypt have to take the issue is just deal with this issue, I mean, through the African Union. That's where they can, I mean, they can come up with a line or better solution. If they want to take it to like Washington or Arab countries, I think it's going to bias a little bit, and then Ethiopia wouldn't be willing to side with what comes out of those negotiations. I think, as we said, they can come up with a better solution on how to, how long they will take to fill up the dam.
Okay, yeah. We'll come to that issue that you just mentioned, taking it to Washington or the Arab League later on. But Egypt think that colonial treaty will give them the right to control the flow of Nile. But by the same token, I believe it's Gamal Abdel Nasser who nationalized the Suez Canal in 1956, if I'm not mistaken. So how relevant is a colonial treaty to Egypt, and does it apply to Ethiopia, who's never been colonized, but the Egyptians and the Sudanese were the beneficiary of this Nile River?
Petros, you know, the British colonies or the British treaties, you see what happened between the Palestinians and the Israelis. We see that a lot of these colonial treaties have created a lot of havoc in a lot of parts of the world. So it's not something new. All we have to do, though, is treaties that were signed by generations before us cannot be applicable to us today. Today, Ethiopia is the second largest population in Africa, and it has needs. Ethiopia goes through droughts almost every 3 to 4 years. It needs to be able to alleviate some of these issues. And they have concerns. They have 110 million people that soon is going to be almost doubling. So they have to take care of 200 million people in a very short period of time. They're saying that they're projecting right now that Ethiopia by 2050 may be close to 200 million people. You cannot leave 200 million people without electricity, without being able to industrialize themselves, without being able to control their agriculture. So yes, Egypt has concerns, but as two others, because these are the three largest countries, Nigeria is the number one, but Ethiopia and Egypt are the two countries that follow. So they cannot afford going to war. That's something that they have to understand. And if Egypt is still threatening to bomb, the dam, they would have a war on their hands that for the next 100 years. This would be the next 100-year war. And that would not be something that they will be winning. We see today what happened in Yemen. And a powerful, rich country like Saudi Arabia cannot dig itself out of it, let alone right now a population of 110 million people that have been at war for a long time. Ethiopia has been fighting for a long time. So it's not something that Egypt should take lightly. These people have been fighting for the last, I don't think this country stopped fighting forever. So it's not something that they should talk lightly, and they should really respect each other. Sit down, like we saw on the Al Jazeera piece that we just played, that it is just negotiating, figuring out how do they manage the use of this water. Ethiopia cannot have 85% of contributing 85% of the Nile water and still not benefit from it. Which century are we in? You know, we cannot be dealing with treaties that were signed by people that didn't have authority to sign for it. The British at that time were a power to reckon with. But at this point right now, I do not think that these treaties are applicable. And just the same way as the UN treaties that were signed in 1945 should be obsolete. We cannot have 5 countries out of close to 200 countries making decisions for populations that are 7 billion people today. So a lot of these treaties have to be renegotiated, revamped, and brought back to a 21st century nations.
One thing I want to add is even treaties are meant to, to evaluate, to change and then get adapted to the context. Treaty is not like something that's supposed to be fixed forever. It has to change according to the situation. So, and the situation right now is 1959, the population size of Ethiopia is not what it is today. And also, we need to account for climate change, because when the United Kingdom was signing up the treaty with Egypt, they have in the back of their mind that other countries have other sources of water to use, so they didn't really care about the other countries. They said, oh, those other countries, they have other water sources, so it shouldn't be a problem. But now, if you look at the way things are with climate change, there are even, we don't get, most countries don't get the same volume of water or rain they used to get many years ago. So they have to rely on, the same sources, which is still providing water today. So there's no way, Egypt should be clinging to a 1959 treaty and then doesn't want to back away from that.
Yeah. In fact, if I may add, the 1929 treaty, Ethiopia was not a part of that treaty. It was between Egypt and the United Kingdom. And 1959, I believe Sudan was included in this treaty. So Ethiopia is paying the price without even being a partner on the treaty. So, but as we say, you don't want your prosperity at the expense of Egyptians. But Ethiopia is not saying that, I believe. They're saying that we can responsibly fill the water for the dam. But to get to this Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam, which is a hydroelectric dam, for Ethiopia it's a growth and economic transformation. 60%, as Alyun indicated, 60% of Ethiopians do not have electricity. And it can generate, if the dam is built, it can generate 6,000 megawatts of electricity for domestic and export use. The water the reservoir size will be 70 billion cubic meters of water. That is as big as Rhode Island or London, for that matter. 1,800 square kilometer, bigger than the city of London. 70 billion cubic meter of water. Then 1,800 square kilometer, bigger than the city of London. $4.8 million worth of cost, that would cost for the project. And they plan to sell the electricity to Sudan, Kenya, Djibouti, Tanzania, and Sudan, South Sudan. Ethiopia promised to fill the dam on the rainy season, which is July to August. I mean, I'm just stating this one just to say that Ethiopia has a reason to build this dam as well for their own developmental purpose. As Egypt is crying foul because their development to be reduced to drought and stuff like that. Is it a fair argument to say they both have valid reason to complain?
No, they both have valid reasons, and we've seen it in the piece that we watched earlier in the show about the concerns of Egypt in terms of the impact that it can have in its agriculture, in its transportation on the Nile River, and even on the Aswan dam. So it would have consequences. But what I'm saying is that's why we negotiate. Negotiation means that if different people have different interests, they find something in the middle that would satisfy both parties. The attitude right now of Egypt is very condescending, and I do apologize to it because they're both African countries. And I don't want this to be viewed as an Arab-African issue. It is an African issue. They're both countries that are anchors when it comes to African politics. So we need them both to negotiate as mature adults. But so far, Egypt is leaning towards the Anglo-Saxon, America, England to leverage their relationship that they've had for centuries with these countries to try to bully Ethiopia to accept conditions. Because if they're trying to push this to say they have to fill up this reservoir in close to 20 years, that's not respecting Ethiopia today. You know, I can understand saying between 7 and 10 years as they're projected right now to say, okay, what is something in the middle that, you know, yes, you will pay a little bit of price, but something that is acceptable, you know, and this has to be something that they deal with as partners, because if not, 5-10 years from now, we would find one of the worst wars, because we have to say that in Africa, so far since we've gotten independence, African countries have not fought direct wars. We have not had any conflict between African countries, which is something pretty much that is we are very proud of saying, you know, because we cannot consider today the Ethio-Eritrean war as a cross-country war, because it was based on a civil war. You know what I'm saying? That after they got the independence of Eritrea was, so we cannot see it so much as different countries fighting a war. But in the case of Egypt and Ethiopia today, Africa cannot afford this. Right now, the process is to go towards industrialization. The process right now is to say, how do we get out of poverty and how do we emerge as countries that can take care of their populations? The same way Egypt is taking care of its population, Ethiopia has to be able right now to avoid a civil war and get to a place where they can feed their populations and they can provide them energy. Nobody can industrialize itself right now. Ethiopia has a huge deficit of electricity today. They have shortages that almost every day they have to cut electricity to be able to provide it on the grid. So that's a big problem. And the government has to, and we have to applaud in this case too. It's not the fact that they're building this dam. The fact, the major fact today is that Ethiopia has been able to rely on its population to raise the funds, and this is almost $5 billion to create this dam, which is something that we have to applaud, because African countries still rely on the IMF and World Bank for a major project. So if they self-finance this project, we have to say, way to go, Ethiopia, and more African countries have to learn from these lessons.
Thank you, Alioune. Alassane, you want to add to it?
Oh yeah, and I would like to say even Egypt is going to benefit from this project, because the 6,000 extra megawatt that the dam electricity that the dam is going to produce is going to be way beyond what I mean Ethiopia needs, and it can sell the rest to the other countries so that for their development purpose. And also I see that I was reading the news trying to find the distance between like Alexandria in Egypt and the Mediterranean Sea. It's about 1,800 miles. So Alexandria is I mean that distance. So it's still possible to even make like a to draw the water from the Mediterranean Sea to a big part of Egypt for I mean the population use. So these are alternatives that Egypt can think about instead of going to war, spending money and putting money in war. You can just put the money toward drawing water from the Mediterranean Sea to Alexandria. And also that they discovered gas, they have some reserve. So these are resources that Egypt can use and to find other alternative to fund his economy or help the farmers. So there are so many approaches that Egypt can use to better itself instead of going to war.
Yeah, of course, the alternatives, I guess, they discussed it some times ago. They can desalinate water from the sea, and even underground water. They have plenty of it. But without going there, but they agreed finally. The only problem that they have is how long will it take to fill the water, the Nile. Ethiopia is estimating, if I'm not mistaken, 4 to 6 years. Egypt wanted to be more than 10 years for them. So where do you draw a solution to this debate? If Ethiopia starts selling electricity in 5 years from now, after completing the project, they should be able to generate a lot of revenue. Would the international community compensate Ethiopia for the loss that they'll be incurring down the line?
I think right now these are two major countries right now in the African continent, and they should be able to figure out a way to partner up and figure out a way that in the long run to avoid any conflicts, water conflicts on that Nile. Today it's Ethiopia needing this, tomorrow it may be Rwanda, and the next day it may be Uganda. So we don't know where this is going to go. So this is something that they have to figure out, that African countries are growing and they would have pressures. They would have internal pressures that they have to answer. So right now nobody can sit and say, okay, my grandparents lived like this, my parents lived like this, we have to live like that. That cannot be done. You know, a lot of these treaties that were signed before African countries got their independence and have interests that they have to defend cannot be taken too seriously today. They have to be renegotiated. And these pressures are going to be on a lot of governments, because the dictatorial government that could be doing anything that they wanted before the age of the internet, before the age of Facebook and Twitter and Instagram, that world is over. You know, today governments have a lot of pressures. Information travels very quickly. So the way we lived 100 years ago, we cannot keep on living like that, because if not, this world would be untenable. And you see what happened with the coronavirus today. So there are a lot of pressures that are going to be put on us, where we would have to quickly learn how to readapt, how to renegotiate, how to discuss as adults without having to go to war. Because right now nobody wins in wars. Nobody. And the weapons are going to be worse. They're going to be more dangerous. So the more we advance through time, the more people, human beings, will have to learn how to talk without going to conflicts, how to renegotiate things and resolve issues as adults, like I like to say, that would benefit both Egypt and Ethiopia.
Yeah,
and
there is an article that I was reading related to this issue, where the World Bank and IMF are even involved in the discussion process. And they said that the World Bank has an experience when it comes to dealing with those kind of issues, because the same issue occurred between India and Pakistan for the same kind of issue. But they made it, through discussion they made it, and then they came up with appropriate solution that's I would call a win-win situation, and no weapon flies and no missile flies over any country. So I think they can still use the same experience or same strategy to come up with a solution.
They do, but since we're talking about conflicts, Ethiopia at one time blamed Egypt for supporting a rebel movement that was stationed in Eritrea. And just like we saw the video a few minutes ago, the Prime Minister of Ethiopia was saying if we resort to that, every Ethiopian should throw a bomb, or it's implication of a war. That's not a language, a diplomatic language, where leaders has to exchange. It looks like that they've reached to that final stage. They're exhausted all the peaceful means. It looks like it. It may not happen. Go ahead.
No, I don't think so. I think it's just posturing, and they're just threatening each other. Yeah, we don't have missiles right now, but we have 100 million people that we can be sending, and they can be throwing bombs everywhere in every corner of Egypt. And this is not a veiled threat. It is something that Egypt has to really take into account. If they destroy this, it's 110 million people. Today, it's 3,000 people from Boko Haram that a big country like Nigeria cannot control. You can imagine what 100 million people that are willing to die for their country are able to do. So this is not a language that they have to take lightly. This is not a conflict that any of them can afford or will win. So it's not even something that we would put on the table. So let's just say that as adults, Sisi and Abiy Ahmed will be able to sit down at a closing table where they will sign a treaty that would put both these major countries of Africa for the next 100 years where there would not be conflicts. We do not need to have a situation between Pakistan and India in Africa. This is something that Africa, we have bigger issues right now than having a tension where there is no peace, no war. We need to be partners. We need to figure out a way that these two major African countries can sit down at the table, at the negotiating table, where they can find a deal where both Ethiopia, it's a win-win situation, where Ethiopia can win, where Egypt can win, and Africa can win. Because all of us right now have a deficit of electricity. Most African countries have a huge deficit of electricity. If today Ethiopia can produce 6,000 megawatt of electricity that can benefit Sudan, South Sudan, Eritrea, and both Djibouti and Kenya and even Egypt, then all of us are winning in this situation. So I seriously, because they're saying Ethiopia can gain up to $1 billion just from the dam revenue a year, that's a big windfall that would help the country a lot. So I hope that the countries have the maturity to really raise on this occasion and avoid any conflict that none of us would win.
Oh, okay. On top of that, let's talk about foreign powers. Egypt, they complained towards the Arab League on the affairs of the Nile, and the entire Arab League, with the exception of Sudan, sided with Cairo. And not only they stopped there, but they even came to the United States. And even United States, at the beginning, it was just a neutral observer, or a mediator for that matter. But down the line, they passed judgment on Ethiopia, particularly not to fill the dam too soon. What do you think the involvement of America and the Arab League?
Well, I mean, according to what I've read, it seems that the United States, the Trump administration, didn't even come up with like a balanced solution. The way they throw their weight into the discussion is it's like they favored more Egypt, and I could see that because if you look back in history, I mean, America has a strong tie with Egypt because of Israel issue. I'm not going to go deeper into that, but I mean, this is not a solution. When it comes to finding a solution to a problem, it has to be a win-win situation. It's not like a zero-sum game where one, party get everything and the other loses everything. So that's, the way the U.S. is proceeding in this discussion is, they say that they gave more favor to Egypt, and to me, I think the African Union should take the matter in its hands. It's an African issue. It has to be dealt on the continent instead of taking it to Arab League or Washington or wherever it may be. The African Union, should be way much involved in that, because we are talking about African free trade, getting together and put in place a strategic economic policy to grow our continent. So I think the African Union should take the matters in its hand.
In fact, it just reminded me that Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed went to South Africa to talk to Ramaphosa on this matter. But before that, Egypt were talking to the Arab League and directly went to the U.S. and allowed them to get involved in the matter of an African affair. So on that, do you have an opinion on that one, Alion?
Yes, I like Alassane just said, I think this is an issue that the African Union should take leadership. This is an African issue that has to be dealt with Africa. The United States is not a fair party and has never been on any conflict, so I don't know why they thought that the mediation should be taken care of by, even though they're both allies of Washington. But Washington has always favored in any negotiation that it has been in, the bias always prim at some level. So that part, I don't think that was a wise issue. If Sisi thought that this was gonna get him ahead, I think this is a mistake. Right now, this is a matter of survival. Ethiopia right now it's growing very fast. It's in need of energy right now to be able to industrialize its economy. So it's at a point right now that I think they both need the Nile, and they both need to figure out a way, like Alassane says, that it's not a zero-sum game. Right now it's a win-win situation. Everybody has to give something on a negotiation. If the price that Egypt has to pay is in the next 10 years, that Ethiopia would be willing to go for a 10-year mark, that it takes them 10 years to fill out the reservoir, then that is what it is. But they have to live with a cost. All of them are paying a cost for it. So it's something that they have to sit down and then figure out a way that both parties can manage it and say, okay, right now I need to release, I need to control. And if we can do that, I think that would be something that would be good for the continent overall, and that would open up a lot of opportunities for all African countries, and that would be a good cementing, because both Nasser and Haile Selassie played a big role in creating the African Union. So they are pioneers that created this union today, that we hope that opens up other opportunities, that all these borders are disappearing little by little, that this nation-state identities disappear slowly in the next, in this century, God willing.
All right. Anything to add, Alassane? By the way, speaking of miscalculation, I would say Egyptians assume that there's a division within an Ethiopian politics, maybe some nationalist movements or other kinds of activities. So some say that they were trying to capitalize on divided Ethiopia. But from what we see right now is even the opposition are all for the project, right?
Yeah.
So stop this miscalculation on both sides, or maybe give a chance to those experts whether the Egyptian claims are valid, saying that drought may come if Ethiopia decided to fill the water in 5 years. Then let the more scientists get involved and work on the technical aspect. Maybe Egypt may be right, but we're not giving those experts enough chance to give us a valid.
They're not negotiating in good faith right now.
Okay.
So there is a lack of trust on both sides. So the big issue right now is they have to bring back the trust issue. So they have to both negotiate in good faith, knowing that their interests are tied. They're not, just like Alassane referred earlier, it's not a zero-sum gain here. It's a win-win situation. You cannot live in peace when your neighbor is in hell. That cannot happen. And those are just commonsensical politics. Politics is just a human activity. It has to base its roots in human needs, not human wants, but human needs. Ethiopia has needs, Egypt has needs. We all have to take care of those needs. And this is just common sense, not talking about politics at a very high level. There are basic needs right now that Ethiopia cannot afford. 110 million people is not a small population. They have to feed this population. They have to they have to generate electricity for this population. If not, Ethiopia is going to explode within itself. And Africa cannot afford that. So those are the kind of issues that we have to bring at the forefront and say, okay, what is the risk at stake right now? That poverty level, Ethiopia cannot afford it. You cannot have a population of 110 million people and not be able to provide. The conflict, the pressure that you're seeing within Ethiopia right now is lack of resources. So those are the things that, as Africa evolves in this century, we have to bring ourselves to a point where the basic human needs, which is food, shelter, health, education, are taken care of. Those basic human needs have to be something now that, Europe and America, this is already taken care of. The Arab countries already are taken care of most of the time. South America has already. The last continent left right now is Africa and India. We're the last places where right now these basic human needs are not taken care of. So we have to strive, and governments have to strive right now to be able to provide to our people. And that has to be something that all African governments have to collaborate, because right now Egypt cannot say, okay, we have peace, we don't care what happens in Ethiopia. Why would Ethiopia then care?
All right. Good, Alassane. And both of you, do you have a last message for the Arab Leagues or for the African Union? If they get involved, how? And it's urgent that they need to say something, they need to do something right away, because this provocation between those two nations can grow.
Well, to me, this is easy. It shouldn't be that hard to come up with a solution. It's just that Egypt has a mindset when it comes to using the Niles. But I don't know why they are still heavily relying on 1921 treaty. It's way obsolete. And then the conditions in which this treaty was signed is way over. It doesn't adapt to our current situation. So I think Egypt should be more flexible when it comes to finding a solution over the Nile, and same as Ethiopia too, because if Ethiopia wants to fill it like in 4 years, If it sees that in 7 or 8 years it can still supply enough energy for their economic growth, they can go ahead of that. I think that way it shouldn't have like a big impact on Egypt too. So when it comes to that, to me, it's a win-win situation.
That is exactly what the previous Prime Minister of Ethiopia said, Meles Zenawi, the late Meles Zenawi. Thank you, Alassane. And you have a last word?
Yes, I think Alassane said it all. This is two great African countries that have marked African history for a very, very long time. That need to play their role. They're the big brothers for the rest of the continent. Like I said, they are one of the biggest populations when it comes to African countries. And they have a leadership to play. So right now we are asking them to go back to the drawing table. And they don't need any external pressures from anybody to be able to resolve this issue the African way. With a handshake, with looking at am I my brother's best keeper, to each others know that Egypt cannot prosper without Ethiopia, and Ethiopia cannot prosper without Egypt. We all are interdependent. Let's have the maturity. Let's take our responsibility as African people to resolve these issues in a most peaceful way that we all can benefit in the long run.
Thank you, Alion. Alion Sam is from Senegal. And Alassane Savadogo is from Burkina Faso. And on that note, we end our today's program segment of Beyond the Headlines. Until we meet on the next time, have a nice day. Thank you.
Hi, it's me again, Korma Agustakmeyer. I'm here today to tell you more about Tempo Africa and how you can contribute. As you know, Tempo Africa is a station that services people of African descent and people in America, people in Africa. It's all over the globe. And for us to do that, we are always accepting donations. To donate, you can go to the website at tempoafrictv.com, and then you click on the homepage and then click on PayPal donation, and you can make your donation there. You could also call in and make a donation. The number is 612-804-0295. I cannot tell you how grateful we are for your donation. Please take the time and check out the website and feel free to donate to this wonderful service that Tempo Afrique continues to offer us abroad and at home. All this information is on the website. Just go to tempoafrictv.com and you will get more information. Thank you very much.
Mama, mama,